Okay, so I like to collect medieval style weapons, right? I've had that on the channel. I can't remember if I've ever shown off this Honshu Claymore, but I've had this for just a little over a year now. And I figure it's probably time I give like a review on it after having used it a lot. I got the blackened version because Shadiversity said that the regular version was prone to rusting. And the bluing, I don't know why it's called bluing when it's blackened, but that oxidation they put on there or whatever helps rust prevention. You might see some bit on there that's brown. That's not rust. The sheath, the liner kind of came out, and it's just a little goopy. And obviously I can't clean it out because you can't take the leather sheath apart. And it is not a scabbard, it's a sheath. There's no wood bit, it's all just leather. I don't really care personally, that's fine. But yeah, this is the Honshu Historic Claymore blackened version. And it's fun. It's a little long. I'm not used to these really long swords, you know. Before this I had and I still have, the Viking sword. But after having used this war sword, as Shad calls them, I don't want a great sword, like a really big one, like a long, really long sword, like a Zweihander. Just because I think I would think it would be too big. My favorite kind of sword is a bastard sword, and the bastard sword would be about the length from the ricasso here and the blade. So about 10 inches shorter, but a really broad cutting blade and more of a spatulated tip. Basically a sword meant to hack and cleave. That's my preferred style of sword. I don't like these really long swords. They're kind of difficult to use. They're a little too floppy for my tastes, at least based off this one. That is 5 mil thick. And if you look at most Zweihanders on the market, they're about the same, maybe 6 mil. I know Cold Steel has recently released a European greatsword, and it is more like a Zweihander, and it's 6 mil. So it's just a little bit thicker than this. So whatever. The blade is very good. The blade is very, very good. It's just retained its factory edge. The edge out of the packaging was not super crazy razor sharp or anything. It cut paper well enough, and it cut other things. I would call it functionally sharp, because if you think about a sword in real life, what they were used for was to fight people, and sometimes those people had armor, and your edge was never going to be super like razor sharp to begin with, and you don't even want that for combat. Because what happens is when you have a super fine razor sharp edge, what happens is that your sword dulls and you can break the edge. So this has a nice edge. It's very durable. I've used this on small-ish trees and branches. It cuts through them. It doesn't snap the branches, it cuts through them. You can see the cuts. Very clean cuts through wood, about 1 inch in diameter. It can hack into, and then 1/2 inch it just kind of sails right through. So very durable blade. I have inadvertently hit steel with the tip, but you probably can't even really tell. It's a little marked, but the tip is still quite pointy, and it was a little mark up at that end. Like I said, you probably won't even be able to tell in the video, but I did whack a big chunk of metal, and it held up pretty well. Very slight deformation at the tip. Still sharp though, still sharp. It's not even at the tip, it's at the bladed portion of the tip, not the literal tip. Although I did smack that off of, well, I can't remember. I think it was I don't know. Maybe I hit a rock or something. I was swinging the sword around, and the actual tip did get a bit of got a little deformed, but it's still pointy enough that if I wanted to stick this through somebody, I could. The rest of the edge is fine. Okay, it's very durable. No issues. Nothing's come loose. It's a peen sword as far as I can tell, and yeah. Now you may notice that I do not have leather on the hilt here, on the handle. And the reason is that the leather was done very cheap. It was a cheap leather. It was very squishy, and it cut into my hands when using it. It kind of blistered my hands. So, like the Kanabo, I took the leather off. And I like the sword much more. I don't personally have a problem with the wooden exposed here. I don't care. Because like this covers the tang, blah blah. You know, I don't have a problem with that. As somebody who primarily uses pole arms and swings that around, I prefer the feel of the wood anyway to the leather. Really don't like the leather. It's one thing I liked about the Cold Steel Viking sword is that the leather there is very, very thin. Some people would say cheap even, but it feels like you're gripping the wood, and that makes it more comfortable. So I don't like a lot of leather. I don't like the leather grip at all. Like I just don't. I don't like the way it feels. So I cut that off, and it came off pretty well. There was no issues. But that's down to personal taste. Sword's pretty quick. You can use it one-handed. I'm not going to do that because I'm indoors, and this sword is 57 inches long, 57 and a half, something like that. So it's quite hard to swing indoors. You really need to do this outside. And right now, it is Sunday morning, and the neighbors are home, and they have small children, and I don't feel like getting the cops called on me again, so I'm not taking the sword outside. Yeah, what else can I say about this sword? The grip, the handle is too short. It is about 9.5 inches, 10 inches I guess if you include the pommel, and it is too short in my opinion for how much blade you have. It does make wielding it a little cumbersome. I don't like it. It's too short. It should be, in my estimation, it should be an extra 3. It should be about a foot long. The grip should be about a foot. Okay, about a foot long. I think it's too short. Granted, I guess my hands are maybe, well, my hands aren't even that big. That's the thing. Like I really don't have very large. I have thicker hands, but they're not very long. So you can see two-handing it, gripping the pommel there. I got about 4 or 5 inches. That's about 3 inches in between there, and I still don't feel that it's enough. So yeah, there's that. So if I'm gonna, I like grabbing the ricasso. That's not bad. It's quite maneuverable that way. And then it becomes kind of like a shorter pole arm. Okay, so the grip's too short. This length of sword, I just feel like you're not getting the kind of crazy reach you would get from a true Zweihander, and you're not getting the usability of a true bastard sword. So there's a reason that swords like these were not really used all that often, and were not very popular for very long. This is very much a transitional sword, in my opinion. They showed up around the 15th century and were pretty quickly phased out by Zweihanders and then your more pointy swords. which were more thrust-centric. And then in the 17th century, you start to see sabers. Because it wasn't guns, it wasn't early guns that made armor ineffective and retired. What actually retired armor was cannons. And none of the history things that I watch on YouTube, it's not really history, it's more sword nerds. They don't ever seem to mention that. They just talk about guns and how, yes, at one point armor was good enough to stop guns, very early firearms, but it wasn't stopping cannons. And the last thing you want to be wearing when your enemy has cannons is a heavy steel set of armor, because it's just going to slow you down and make it harder for you to potentially get the fuck out of the way of the cannon fire. And it's not going to really offer any protection at all against cannons, obviously. So it was cannons that kind of did away with armor. Portable battlefield cannons. Not so much guns. Although guns later on, obviously, outdid armor, retired armor. But I'm talking like early firearms is not what phased out armor. Because yes, they did make breastplates and stuff that could stop bullets. It was cannons. But anyway, that's the Honshu Historic Claymore. This war sword type is not my type of sword. I think it's too big. It's simultaneously too big and not big enough. Because if you look at my axe, let me go get my long axe, okay? Let me go get the long axe. Okay, this is my Sparth axe, okay? Sparth means axe, but sometimes it's called a Sparth axe. It's a heavy Sparth. It was used by Gallo-Glass mercenaries. This is my favorite weapon currently in my collection, I believe. I do like this sword. I love the look of the sword and everything. I love the aesthetic of the sword. I just don't like using it very much. But from a functional standpoint, I really like this axe. Now, yeah, the sword is longer than the axe in total length. But this is my problem with this type of sword, is that the axe feels longer. I feel like I have more reach with my axe than I do with this sword. Because it's a pole arm. It means I can have all this as leverage. Okay? It's more maneuverable as well, believe it or not. The axe is more maneuverable than the sword. Now maybe that's because I train more with these types of weapons than I do with a sword. But to me, the sword with the shorter grip here is very problematic to actually use. And what I end up doing a lot of the time is smacking myself with this ridiculously oversized guard, which I didn't mention, but now I'm mentioning it. So, I feel like I have more reach with the axe. The other reason that I think pole arms of this size work in these types of swords aren't as good as some people like to think is because, yes, I have more reach with the sword than I do with that axe. And this is all blade that can be used. But the problem with swords that not enough people talk about is that basically you're going to look at the point of percussion, right? So with this sword, it's about right in here, okay? So basically, when you swing this at somebody, you want to hit them with this portion. I'm not saying that this won't cut someone, but that's where you want to hit things. And in my cut test, that is proven true as well. Hi, Spooky. Say hi to Spooky. But with this axe, okay, I have a foot of blade. Now, yeah, that's about the same as that sword. But the axe just hits with so much more force. And I can use it in more ways because of the haft. You can choke up on the axe. You can fight with it close in like this. Fighting with that sword close in is very tough. And then if I have the sword like this and I hit somebody with it, swords aren't lightsabers. They're not going to cut into you just because you tap them with it. Okay? Like, it's not going to do a whole lot of damage unless you're getting a proper swing. Because that sword only weighs about 4 pounds. So it doesn't have the mass to do anything with it. But if I choke up on this axe and get somebody like this, that's going to fucking hurt. If not outright kill them if they're not in armor. Just a short strike like that can do a lot of damage. The other thing with the axe, you can choke up on it like this and then swing down and kind of effectively increase the range of the strike. So you just have more room to play around with an axe of this size than you do a sword. Because it's very difficult to use this sword in tighter spaces. The other problem with this sword, you might think because of the ricasso, you can use it like a spear. The problem is, the blade is too floppy. Okay? Even trying to hit light targets with this, I've noticed the blade just kind of gyrates out. And I'm talking cardboard boxes. Like stiff cardboard boxes, but still. I'll go to stab it, and the blade just kind of, and then it won't go through. And that's because the blade's real floppy. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of this type of blade. I don't believe that these swords were that effective historically and were used for very long periods of time. Yes, the aforementioned Gallowglass did sometimes use swords about this size, but most commonly they used the axe. And then their backup sword was like a smaller, choppy sword. I forget, I want to say it's a Casbulger, but I think that was a different mercenary group that used that. But basically it was a smaller chopping sword, kind of like a Viking sword. Viking sword, I know that it's not a Viking sword, but that's what everybody knows it as. So, the Viking sword. So yeah, this 5 foot long sword here, it's cool, but there's a reason that these types of swords were not used all that often, in my opinion, and weren't around for very long. This Y-hander is just more effective at reach and area control, and the much longer handle makes it easier to maneuver in tighter spaces. Because not only do you have about a foot of handle, if not sometimes 18 inches of handle on some of those swords, but you also have a longer ricasso, and then you have the blade at the end. So a proper Y-hander is really like a full steel pole arm. Okay? So you have a lot more ability to maneuver that type of sword without sacrificing the reach as much. Because if you do it like this, if you wield this at the whatever this is, the ricasso here, you're basically wielding a long sword now, but not a long sword that isn't as good at thrusting. So yeah, I don't think this type of sword historically was really all that effective. I mean, obviously it's a big sword, but like, there's a reason that it got replaced pretty quickly. There's a reason swords of this size didn't start to creep up until around the mid-14th century, and then got replaced by Y-handers. Whereas your sidearm sword, your arming sword, was kind of always around. And then you had your bastard sword that came up before this type of sword. And then they just kept making the swords longer as the blacksmithing got better. And they did go back to the bastard sword. And they always used the arming sword. And then eventually, like I said, all swords got replaced by cavalry sabers. Okay? I don't really know why. Probably because guns were just so effective. It's like, at that point, guns were the primary. So if you're going to have a backup, it might as well be a light sword that can cut unarmored opponents, but mostly thrust. But yeah, and that actually kind of reminds me. You'll notice this has nothing to do with. I'm going to conclude the review of the sword, but then I'm going to go into my next point about thrusting versus chopping. Okay, so this sword, if you like this type of sword, this size of sword, this is a really good sword, especially for the price. When I got it, it was like $360. Okay, I think now it's like $370. Not bad. So if you like this type of sword, and I would classify this as like a Dark Souls greatsword. Shad calls it a war sword. Scalagrim, I think, refers to them as war swords. Then this is probably the best one on the market that you can get. That's also the least expensive. It's very durable steel. It doesn't rust if you get the blackened version. The blade's very durable, very tough. Honshu, from everything I've seen, Honshu makes great blades. It's just everything else about the swords tends to suck. But this is very solid, hasn't come loose at all. I have hit fairly hard targets. It's very good, and it's fairly light. Like I said, you can use this one-handed if you want to. I found that the best way to get leverage and to wield it, if you're going to try to swing it around one-handed, is to just wrap a finger around the guard. And that gives you much more control. Hell, I like doing that even if I'm just swinging it two-handed. Because it just gives you more control. The sword would benefit greatly from having a longer handle. But yeah, in conclusion, for this sword, it's a very good sword for the price. If you like this type of sword, I personally, after wielding it, I prefer a bastard sword. I want my sword to be about this long at the longest. That includes the handle. And then I want a thick, choppy blade. Like just a really, broad, somewhat thick blade. Around 6 mil, 7 mil. And very broad. Because I want to hack and cut with my sword. And I want it to be maneuverable. Maneuverable in this, not that it's, maneuverable in the sense that I can pull it in close and get closer chops and hacks with it. Unlike this. This really cannot be used close up very effectively. Unless you want to smack people with the cross guard. But you can't even Mordhau this because of how floppy the blade is. So you can't do that either. Now, that's the Honshu Greatsword, Claymore. I have not got the Greatsword. I probably wouldn't buy the Greatsword. It looks gimmicky, and it's not even a proper Greatsword, so I wouldn't get that, although it does have a longer handle. Anyway, good sword for the price. The leather sucks on the handle. So use it with gloves or cut it off like I did and rewrap it. But I didn't care to rewrap it because I actually prefer the wood finish anyway. Good sword. Not my type of sword. I like a bastard sword. Or even an arming sword. Because those tend to be choppy blades as well. Okay. So a common thing with sword people is that they'll tell you that the thrust is better than the cut. And I'm here to tell you, despite all the common bullshit that you hear, that is not true. That is not true. Okay? The only reason that swords went to thrusting is because armor got so good that the sword cutting was effectively useless. That's why you needed to have your reinforced, slender longsword tips to kind of pierce into the gaps in armor to get people in vital spots through mail. Thrusting is not more effective than cutting on a sword. If you have a big ass spearhead, yes, because that's going to make a much bigger wound channel. But these really small tipped, like people think rapiers are the king of swords. They're not. In order to kill somebody effectively with a rapier, you have to be incredibly skilled and go for a vital spot. If you don't hit that vital spot, getting stabbed is not that big of a deal. If you don't get hit through the heart, you're not going to die outright. even getting a lung pierced isn't going to kill people unless it's like a really grievous, like a big ass spear. If you get stabbed through the chest with a leaf spear and it pierces a lung, yeah, you're probably going to die pretty quickly. But a narrow ass sword isn't going to kill you. And the analogy for this is actually bullets. Bullets, okay? You have people that get over penetration on bullets. Like 9mm is really good at going through people. And what tends to happen is that it doesn't drop them, especially not if they're like, you know, trying to kill you. That's why standard issue is 10mm, okay, for like police. Because that bullet expands and causes massive cavity damage, okay? And the bullet most likely isn't going through you. So you have to hit vital areas if you're going to stab someone with a relatively small implement. And what are bullets but projectile spears, essentially? Okay? So thrusting with a sword is not as effective as cutting. It's just the only option to use a sword against a heavily armored opponent is to have a sword that can get through vital spots and mail. Okay? The reason, besides my bullet analogy, which I know some people, most people, will disagree with, but if you just look at how ballistics work, you'll understand what I'm saying. A bullet that just zips straight through is not doing very much damage at all. It's just not. Unless it's like a really big fucking caliber, like a 50 cal or a 45 that just blows massive chunks away because of how much force it has. That's a different story. I'm not talking about that. Okay? Yeah. It doesn't deal, it's not going to drop you. Like even arrows. People think arrows have a fairly wide head. Okay? But this bullshit of like you see in movies, somebody gets hit with an arrow and they instantly die, is bullshit. It's complete bullshit. It's not going to kill you in one hit unless it gets you through the heart or through the eye and the brain or something like that. Most people are not going, like you're not going to die from one unless it gets you through the heart. You're just not. You get shot in the shoulder with an arrow, I guarantee you, especially people who are trained to fight, like, so, you know, medieval soldiers or whatever, they're going to be able to fight through that. It's going to be a detriment, sure, but you haven't disabled them. Guarantee it. So, the main reason for the swords, or what I'm saying about the swords, is because as armor decreased, due to firearms, because with early firearms, they stopped wearing as much armor on the arms and the legs and whatnot, because people shooting at you are going to shoot center mass, because that's the easiest part to hit. So the breastplates got really thick, and it wasn't a weight issue, it was just, you didn't really need to worry about it. But the swords always went back to heavy cutting swords, big chopping swords. The reason is because if you have somebody who's not wearing much armor, and you have a nice choppy sword, let me go grab another sword actually, my Viking sword. Let me go, because that one's broader. Here, this is the cold steel Viking sword, okay? This is about 6.5 mil thick, and you can see that it is fairly broad, especially compared to the Honshu Claymore, okay? It's a broad sword. It's got a broad blade. It is a one-handed sword, but it weighs about 3 pounds. 2.5 to 3 pounds. So you have something like this, or a bastard sword that's even wider bladed and two-handed. And You just hack off somebody's arm with this, right? You're fighting somebody and you just take their arm off. And don't think this wouldn't do it. That's gonna do way more damage than getting thrusted through and not hitting a vital spot. This idea that slashing and hacking into the human body isn't as effective as a poke is mental retardation. I don't know who started the myth, probably Hollywood, but the people who say this have absolutely no idea how anything functions. They don't understand combat, they don't understand how the human body functions. I promise you that I'm right, okay? It's way more devastating to get cut into than it is to get poked by something like a rapier, okay? The rapier was a dueling weapon, and it was used by aristocrats to gentlemanly kill each other because it didn't make a big mess. Unlike something like this. They are not the deadliest swords. They are not more deadly than hacking swords. There's a reason that this type of sword was the predominant sword. As soon as people started making swords, they made it to hack into other people. You can go back to the Greeks. They had the little, the fuck was that called? You know what I'm talking about, like 300 Spartans. They had that little hacky sword. That's how people used swords. Yes, you could stab with it, but your primary goal, you had your spear to stab people with because a spear has a lot of range, but also spearheads were very broad. The only spear that I can really think of that was more narrow was a pylon. Okay? That was used by the Romans, and it was a throwing weapon. Okay? They would throw it. It's not gonna, cause massive damage, but it's going to give your opponent pause if 300 of them come flying at you. And then another 300. And however many people you got in your legion, okay? But that was not used like how the Spartans would fight with their spears and keep it going like a phalanx, okay? The pylon was a dedicated throwing weapon, okay? So that worked for that reason. But the reason that most swords were like this, and then you had your bastard swords, which could be a little wider and heavier and, two-handed functionality, was because hacking into people works really fucking well. They're going to bleed out faster, if not outright die if you nick an artery, okay? You slash someone in the neck, they're going to die. You hit the carotid artery. You get them in the arm, up around the shoulder, the collarbone area, they're going to die very quickly. They're going to bleed out. You get them in the leg, there's a good chance they're going to bleed out very quickly. But if you get stabbed, you're not dying instantly unless you get stabbed in the heart. Getting stabbed through the heart or potentially through the eye into the brain is the only way you're going to kill somebody instantly with a thrust. Unless what you're hitting them with has so much force, like a big bullet, it just obliterates everything on impact. That's a different story. They didn't have anything like that back then. Well, they had cannons, and they had ballistas. Even maybe crossbows to an extent. But I would bet that even a crossbow, even a really heavy crossbow, isn't going to take someone out in one shot if it doesn't hit the heart. But getting hacked by a big-ass piece of steel will. There's a reason that axes were so damn effective, too. It's the same thing. Axes hit with a lot of force, and they hacked into you. Chopping is way more effective than thrusting, and I'm just sick and tired of people insisting that thrusting's better. And it's mostly these fucking HEMA nerds who don't actually compete at anything physical. They don't do anything but collect swords and then talk about the swords like they're amazing experts at swords. And then they read old manuals. It's another thing I don't like. All these old fucking manuals that people like to spout off about these sword masters. These were just rich fucks who dueled each other for fun. Or to settle idiotic disputes. And the reason that they predominantly used thrusting was because it was considered gentlemanly. Because, again, it didn't make a big mess, okay? It's much cleaner to run someone through than it is to hack off a limb or two. So that's why the thrust was predominated in HEMA. And these fucking nerds are pretentious asswipes mostly. And they don't know what, they don't understand how combat works. They don't understand how the body works. Now, it is easier to stick someone than it is to hack at someone. It's quicker. And I'm not saying that thrusting is bad. You don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's effective, okay? But what I am saying is that thrusting swords were not the deadliest swords. They were not special. They didn't kill easier or better. They were used for a specific purpose. A sword like this is overall much more effective than a dedicated thrusting sword because I can also cause massive damage if I hack into you. It's just that for highly specialized fighting purposes, rich guys in steel plate and mail, you needed something, if you weren't going to use a pole hammer or a pole axe, you needed a way to get the gaps in the armor. And something like this is just not going to do it. Okay? Against mail, though, like mail and gambeson, getting hit with this is going to hurt. It's going to break bones. I guarantee it. Mail doesn't disperse impact the way that plate does. It doesn't really disperse it at all. What mail does do is protect you from the grievous hacking wounds that these types of weapons inflicted. And even some larger spears. I would say spears aren't getting through properly made mail because they're too broad. And that's why these swords, these long swords, were so narrow tipped. Because those could hit a ring. Because how you break mail is not with... you can break it with blunt force. A two-handed axe can break mail. But it's not cutting through the mail. It's just smashing it. It's hitting it so hard it just snaps, essentially. And like a warhammer can do it. But that is more concentrated force. Obviously, the spike on a warhammer can do it, and so can the beak. But the way a sword does it, like those slender swords, those really narrow-tipped swords, is because you hit a ring, and the ring bursts. And that burst ring leaves the other rings bursting due to the way that riveted mail is made. And these types of swords generally aren't doing it. So that's a rant that I've been thinking about for a couple days. And like I said, it's not that thrusting weapons are bad. It's not that thrusting is a bad tactic. I'm just tired of fucking fat nerds on the internet saying that, oh, well, thrusting is just more effective. And they just say it. And they don't think about what they say, and they just say it. And I hate when people do that. I cannot stand when people just say something factually, and they don't even think about what they're saying or think of why it's true. I can't stand it. If you just think for 5 minutes about it, obviously, getting chopped by something like this, or this axe, or even that Honshu historic Claymore, is going to be really, really devastating. We've kind of come full circle, because back in the day, you used to have, and I do blame some Japanese cinema for this, you get a guy who gets slashed by a katana, not all the way through, just slashed across the chest, then he dies. That's not realistic either. But they couldn't show the violence. So really, it's a Hollywood trope. And now you have being stabbed through is kind of a trope. It doesn't work that way. The reason that thrusts were predominantly used in all of these fencing manuals is because fencing was dueling for rich people. Okay? Aristocrats. And like I said, running someone through was cleaner than hacking them to bits. And thus, it was more gentlemanly. There's a reason that those books, people who study HEMA, you don't take them seriously when it comes to actual historical medieval warfare, because their understanding of combat is one-on-one duels with a bunch of rules. Okay? It's retarded. People on a battlefield swinging these weapons around didn't fight like that. And you can ask, oh, but what's your credentials? My credentials is common sense and practicing with this shit outside. Okay? Think about it for 5 minutes. Go do some HEMA, and then just try. Just try to imagine a big battlefield where everything breaks off and everything's chaotic as fuck. Where are you going to do your fancy HEMA moves? Nowhere. Okay? Or you're in formation, which is how most battles were actually fought back then. Where are you going to do your fancy HEMA moves? Nowhere. It's not fucking possible. It's for dueling. It was a set of rules and a fighting style that rich people studied to fight each other when they got offended by something stupid. Okay? The reason that thrusting swords were predominantly used is because it was a cleaner kill, or you didn't actually kill them. That's another reason. Because getting stabbed doesn't instantly kill you unless you're getting run through the heart. And I know some people will be like, oh, but infection's bullshit. How many times do you get stabbed by something outside and then you get a massive infection? How many times? I've never been infected by fucking anything like that. Ever. Rusty nails, doesn't matter. Dirty branches out in the middle of nowhere, doesn't matter. I haven't had any vaccines in like 20 years. Okay? Totally fine. The Tdap vaccine, that only lasts for 5 years? Yeah, something like that. And that's for tetanus. Okay? So, this whole idea of mass infections everywhere and people dropping dead from that's bullshit too. But that's an entirely different rant. But, yeah. Don't listen to the HEMA nerds. They don't know what they're talking about. Thrusting swords are not better than hack and slash swords. And any time that armor lessened up or wasn't as, advanced, hack and slash swords were the predominant sword. And holy shit, I've been yakking for 45 minutes almost. I'm done with this. Peace out.